Westworld Season 4 Episode 6 Ending Explained. The 6th episode of Season 4 of the show was quite an intimate one that focused a lot on Caleb and his escape, whilst Frankie and Bernard spent their time trying to fix up and revive their weapon, which was Maeve. With an ending that set up the final 2 episodes of the show, I thought I'd recap the episode, break it down, and explain all that there was to take away from it. So let's get into it. Here is Westworld Season 4 Episode 6 Ending Explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. This episode started off with us seeing a version of Frankie in the city where she looked just a couple of years older than when her father Caleb originally left her, which showed that the park had looked this way for a long while. We saw her encounter Jay for the first time all of those years ago when he became an outlier, leading them to rescue him. Once rescued, we saw that Frankie had a daily routine at a set time where she would radio her father to see if he was still out there, as she believed that he was. This was when we also heard her refer to Jay as a new brother, which was something that would prove to be a poignant piece of information in the future, as he said how she wasn't his sister. Following this, we cut to the more present day where we saw all of the main characters other than William and Christina in this episode. As per usual, I'll break this video down by the different character arcs that we had in this episode. Caleb. Caleb shared the main focus of this episode, and I think it was Aaron Paul's best performance in this season yet. The majority of it was spent with him trying to escape the cell that he was being kept in. We saw Hale state that the outliers that we saw in the show all started with Caleb. He was the first of their kind and was able to repel the infection and control that Hale put upon them, leading to it eventually being something that was somehow adopted by others. This was something that we saw was the main piece of information that Hale wanted to get out of Caleb, but he wasn't prepared to give it up or even really know himself. In his state, we saw him tackle an escape plan, where as he was doing it, the previous prints of himself had all failed to do so, but they managed to leave clues. He was encountering them along different routes of the journey, almost like checkpoints, where they'd provide him clues, assistance, and answers on how to move on to the next step. These were all versions of him that never made it out before, but the 278th version we were watching appeared to be garnering the most success. So much so that he did manage to make it out and make it to the radio. We saw him leave a message to his daughter Frankie where he stated how he loved her, apologized for not being there for her, and he almost handed over the mantle, stating that she was the person who would have to stop Hale. This, paired with the multiple flashbacks that we had of the pair of them when she was younger, felt like a way of showing the true emotions that Caleb felt and carried towards his daughter, despite the fact that Frankie stated how hosts can switch their emotions on and off when necessary. This was when she was speaking to Bernard about Maeve. After this, we saw that Hale was right behind him, and that she had actually been the one setting the whole thing up in order to hear the message that he was going to leave Frankie. I believe that she was hoping to hear him state how he's able to repel being controlled by her, and to find out what made him so unique. But she got nothing like it and only heard affection, which was much to her dismay. I also think that the checkpoint Calebs that we had along the route were also planted there by Hale as well, showing that he'd never tried to do it before. Following this, she then proceeded to kill the version of Caleb after he gave a monologue on how the hosts in the city want nothing to do with her, and that they'd rather be dead than live in her world. Then we saw the 279th version of him being printed and being told to wake up as the final shot in the episode, showing that the whole cycle is about to begin again and Caleb will likely endure similar to what we'd seen in this episode. Frankie. This was the most time that we got to spend with Frankie on an individual episode this season. We saw her with Bernard as they retrieved the most powerful weapon, which we found out was Maeve. Frankie's keen to revive Maeve due to the fact that she was the last person to see her father, and despite holding some resentment towards her, as she partially blames her for her father's disappearance, she's prepared to bring her back because of how valuable it will be to her to know what happened to her father. We saw her spend a lot of her time at the venue and park of Westworld from season 1 of the show. It was almost now derelict and covered in dust. It was a haunting sight and a reminder of the past which Bernard was all too familiar with, and we saw his expertise come in handy in this episode. He's slowly revealing his identity to Frankie, and I think it's something that will be revealed as time goes on. During the process of Maeve being revived, we saw Jay and the other members of the Outliers return to them with the most recent recruit from last week's episode, where he stated how there was a mole in the group. Frankie immediately blamed Bernard, which at the time we all knew wasn't the case. In a moment of just Frankie and Bernard, he stated how there were multiple outcomes to the situation, where it varies from time to time on who in the group is the mole. And in this instance, after Frankie presumed it to be her partner initially, it turned out to be Jay, which he found out when he referred to her as a sister, something that we saw in the start of the episode he was strongly against. Bernard has been using his knowledge of knowing everything that's going to unfold to his advantage, and although the situations are different every time, he does definitely provide value to the group, and I think Frankie is starting to see that, despite not seeing it at first and siding with the rest of the outliers. We saw the message that Caleb broadcast to Frankie, which gave her a first glimpse in years to know that her father is still alive. However, she doesn't know that he's now in the form of a host and lost his human form long ago. So I'm intrigued to see how she'll handle that and if she's able to trust him. Jay, who was the mole, who we saw was in fact a host under Hale's control, and was looking for where Maeve's pearl was kept due to Frankie and Bernard hiding it, was eventually killed after a showdown between Frankie and himself, but it turned out to be Maeve that awoke and killed Jay. We heard that there were multiple outcomes upon Maeve waking up, one where she goes ballistic and fights against Bernard and Frankie, and other occasions where she wakes up as normal, and in this timeline it turned out to be that she woke up as normal. With Frankie now equipped with Maeve, I think we'll see her learn more about what happened to her father when she was younger, and they'll now use the words that Caleb broadcast with the aim of breaking down the city that's under Hale's control and hopefully destroying her. With the song Love and War playing in the background, the two things that the two final episodes of the season will most likely be centered around. After Maeve stated that they need to finish what they started, I imagine the two final episodes are going to be explosive to say the least. Hale. Hale's involvement in this episode was quite minimal in terms of impact, but she acted as the games master almost, setting up and allowing Caleb to escape whilst she watched from afar with the hopes and intentions of finding out why he's so special compared to the others. We saw that she was the very person who allowed him to find his way out, and in the end, as she stated, it was basically all for nothing as she learned no more about him. We also saw her speaking with Clementine, where she heard that the outliers got away with the latest one that they got from the park that William was sent to retrieve. The more powerful moments from this character came in the closing moments, where we saw that she was on the receiving end of Caleb stating how nobody wants to be in her world, where we then got a shot of her stood on top of the skyscraper looking over the city that she created, where she's gradually losing control and the hosts aren't following her orders as she'd like, or transcending, meaning leaving their human bodies behind. We saw that her arm was covered in blood following the scratch wounds that she had upon her, like we saw in the previous episode, so we know that the lack of control is something that's weighing heavily on her, and she wants to get to the bottom of it. Following this, we saw her back inside the facility where she was staring at a blank chair, as if to say to herself that she can't give up in finding out the answer about Caleb, and we then saw her proceed to go on to print out a 279th version of him, with the hopes of finding out what she needs to know about how he's different. We heard "wake up," just like we did earlier on in the episode, marking it as a full circle moment, and that the cycle was about to repeat again. I thought this week's episode was a good one. I certainly missed the presence of William and Christina, as I felt after the end of last week's episode there was a lot to delve into. I was intrigued to see where they were going to go, especially with the revelation that all of this is there because of Christina, and the fact that she holds the ability to control things in real time. As well as with the host version of William questioning his purpose, it highlighted that another outlier could be on the cards, and one that's close to Hale, but I imagine we'll see just how this develops in next week's episode of the show. So, there you have it, Westworld Season 4 Episode 6 Ending Explained. What did you think of Season 4 Episode 6? Leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.